I was the only woman in the room, and they made that clear every day. One executive said, "We hired you to look diverse, not lead." I endured their laughs, took notes, and waited. When the merger happened, they were forced to answer to their new boss, who turned around and said, "I was the only woman in the room, and they never let me forget it." Every day, I walked into that glass-walled conference room, past the receptionist's desk with her forced smile, past the rows of cubicles where the guys would stop talking the moment I got close. They'd look at me like I didn't belong. And honestly, I didn't. Not to them. They'd say things that were almost jokes, but not quite. Things like, "We hired you to look diverse, not lead." Or, "You're really great at taking notes, must be all that multitasking." They'd laugh, slap each other on the back, and keep talking while I sat there, biting the inside of my cheek so hard it would bleed sometimes. They never asked for my ideas. When I spoke up, they ignored me. When I made a suggestion, they'd glance at each other, smirk, and keep going like I wasn't even there. It was like I was invisible unless they needed a woman in the picture for their inclusive photo ops. There was one guy, Paul. He was the worst. VP of Operations. Bald, loud, always cracking jokes that made everyone laugh, even when they weren't funny. He'd lean back in his chair during meetings, arms folded behind his head, and say stuff like, "Oh, let the little lady talk, let's see what she's got," and the room would erupt in fake laughter. It burned, but I kept my face neutral. I didn't let them see how much it got to me. I took notes. Every meeting, every snide comment, every time they cut me off or dismissed me. I kept files on everything. Who said what, when they said it, what projects they mishandled. It wasn't hard to see the cracks in their perfect little world if you knew where to look. And I did. I watched. I waited. Then the merger talk started. The air in the office changed almost overnight. These guys, Paul, Mark, Dan, all of them, started sweating. They tried to act like they had it all under control, but I could see it in the way they whispered behind closed doors, the way they started working late and triple-checking reports. They knew the merger could shake things up. They just didn't know how much. I kept my head down, stayed quiet, kept taking notes. The day the merger was announced, they held an all-hands meeting. The big boss from the other company, a woman named Ruth, flew in from New York. She walked in like she owned the place. Sharp suit, calm, steady eyes that didn't miss a thing. The guys tried to act like they were running the show, talking over her, interrupting, even trying to explain her own reports to her. It was like they couldn't help themselves. And then Ruth said it. She leaned back, looked around the room at all of them, Paul, Mark, Dan, and said, "It's interesting. I was reviewing your leadership team's performance, and I have to ask, if you're all so good at what you do, why are the margins shrinking? Why are the clients leaving? And why is it that the only person in this room with any long-term vision is the woman you hired to make yourselves look diverse?" Dead silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Paul's face went bright red. Dan looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I just sat there, calm, watching it all unfold. They had no idea what was coming next. After Ruth dropped that bombshell in the meeting, the guys tried to recover, but it was obvious they were rattled. Paul stammered something about long-term vision being teamwork-driven, and how they worked as a unit. Ruth didn't even blink. She stared him down like she was bored. The next few days, the whole office shifted. The guys who used to smirk when I walked by were suddenly quiet. I caught whispers in the hallways. They were nervous, unsure of what was coming. Paul started calling me into his office more, asking for updates on projects he never cared about before. It was like they were scrambling, trying to figure out where they stood. But I wasn't playing their game. I kept doing my work, quietly, thoroughly. I knew Ruth was watching. Then one day, something happened that I wasn't ready for. Paul sent me an email, short, just one sentence. "Meet me in conference room B at 3. No subject line, no explanation. I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked in at 3, and Paul was there, along with Mark and Dan. The door clicked shut behind me. Paul leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice low and serious. "You've been playing a dangerous game," he said. "Ruth thinks you're some kind of star. But let's get one thing straight, she's not going to be around forever. And when she's gone, it'll be us deciding who stays and who goes." He smirked, like he thought he'd put me back in my place. Dan chimed in, "You should learn to keep your head down, you know? Not make waves." I didn't say a word. I just stared at them, taking it all in. They thought they could threaten me, intimidate me back into silence. I realized right then that they were scared. Really scared. They knew Ruth had seen something they hadn't, and they couldn't control the narrative anymore. So I decided to push back, just a little. I looked Paul right in the eye and said, "You're right. Ruth won't be around forever. But I've been watching, Paul. And I know things. About the contracts you signed. About the clients you lost. About that vendor deal you tried to hide. So maybe it's not me who should be worried." The room went dead quiet. Mark shifted in his seat. Dan looked away. Paul's face darkened. His jaw clenched. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He just stared at me like he wanted to crush me. But I wasn't scared anymore. After that, they started acting weird. Paul stopped making eye contact. Mark started asking me for advice on projects. Dan tried to be overly friendly, fake smiles and small talk. It was all so obvious. And then came the audit. Ruth ordered a full financial audit of all the regional offices. It was chaos. They scrambled, trying to cover up their mistakes, but I had everything: emails, files, records. I knew where the bodies were buried, so to speak. I started slipping things into the auditor's reports. Quietly, methodically. And the more I uncovered, the worse it got for them. Vendor kickbacks. Fake invoices. Clients that had walked away because of broken promises. Even a few expense reports that looked off. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just kept feeding the auditors the information they needed. I knew it was all building toward something bigger. I could feel it. But there was still one thing I didn't know: what Ruth's real plan was. Because she wasn't just here to clean up the mess. There was something else. And I could tell, she wasn't done yet. A week after the audit started, things at the office were tense. Paul and the other guys were scrambling, trying to correct reports, scheduling late-night meetings behind closed doors, whispering in the hallways like middle school kids who'd been caught doing something bad. One morning, I walked in and found Paul in the conference room, talking to a lawyer. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough: something about exposure, liability, mitigating damages. My stomach twisted. It was bad. And Paul knew it. That afternoon, Ruth called me into her office. She sat behind her desk, calm as ever, a small folder in front of her. She tapped it twice with her finger before sliding it across the desk to me. "I need you to look this over," she said. I opened it, and my hand started shaking. Inside were emails, contracts, spreadsheets. Proof. All of it. The vendor kickbacks, the fraudulent invoices, the manipulated sales numbers. Names attached to everything: Paul's, Mark's, Dan's. I looked up at Ruth. She was watching me closely, her face unreadable. "I need someone who understands the inner workings of this office," she said, her voice steady. "Someone who's been ignored but has been paying attention." It felt like a punch to the chest. She knew. She knew exactly what had been going on, and she knew I'd been watching. Waiting. But then she said something that changed everything. "I also know about you," she said, her voice lowering. "Your notes. Your files. The emails you've saved." I froze. My heart started racing. How did she know? She leaned back, hands folded in her lap. You've been careful. Smart. But you need to be even smarter now. Paul's not going down without a fight. He's already trying to pin some of this on you. There's a trail, just enough that, if you're not careful, they could throw you under the bus. My throat went dry. I wanted to argue, but I knew she was right. These men, Paul especially, would do anything to save themselves. Including blaming me. Tell me what you want me to do, I said quietly. Ruth nodded once, like she'd been waiting for that. She handed me a flash drive. This has what you'll need. Backups of the files. The ones they'd been trying to hide. I took it. My hands felt cold. And one more thing, she added. Paul's been planning to move funds. Offshore accounts. Quietly. If he does that, it's over. We lose everything. My stomach dropped. I had suspected something shady, but offshore accounts? It was bigger than I thought. And I knew right then, this wasn't just a workplace issue anymore. It was a full-blown takedown in the making. The kind where people lose their jobs, their reputations, maybe even face charges. And I was right in the middle of it. But Ruth wasn't done. There's a meeting tomorrow. Private. Paul, Mark, Dan, and the CFO. They're going to sign off on a transfer, move funds before the audit is finalized. I want you in that room. I blinked. Me? Ruth smiled faintly. Yes. And I need you to record it. All of it. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her. She slid a small recorder across the table. My fingers curled around it. It felt heavier than it should have. Do you want this, or not? She asked quietly. I stared at her. And slowly, I nodded. It was a dangerous game. But I wasn't backing down. Not anymore. The next morning, I arrived early. The conference room was already set up. Polished table, water pitchers, and a tray of pastries no one would touch. I took my seat, placing the recorder Ruth had given me discreetly in my purse, ensuring it was on. Paul, Mark, Dan, and the CFO, Greg, entered, their faces tight with tension. Paul nodded at me, a forced smile on his lips. Let's get started, he said, opening his laptop. They began discussing the transfer of funds, using coded language and vague terms. But it was clear. They were planning to move company money into offshore accounts before the audit could catch them. I sat silently, taking notes, my heart pounding. Then, Paul turned to me. You're taking notes, right? We need a record of this meeting. I nodded, hiding my smirk. After the meeting, I went straight to Ruth's office. She listened to the recording, her expression unreadable. When it ended, she looked at me. Excellent work, she said. Now, we let the auditors do their job. Over the next week, the auditors uncovered everything, the fraudulent transfers, the fake invoices, the embezzlement. Ruth called an emergency board meeting. Paul, Mark, Dan, and Greg were all present, looking smug, thinking they could talk their way out of anything. But when Ruth played the recording of the meeting, their faces turned pale. This is a clear violation of company policy and federal law, Ruth said. You're all terminated, effective immediately. Legal action will follow. Security escorted them out, their protests echoing down the hallway. In the aftermath, I was promoted to Vice President of Operations. Ruth commended my diligence and integrity. The company culture shifted. Diversity and inclusion became more than buzzwords, they became core values. As for Paul and his cronies, they faced legal consequences. Their reputations were ruined, their careers over. And me? I continued to lead, not just as a symbol of diversity, but as a testament to resilience and justice. The day of the board meeting was like stepping into a different world. I wore my best black suit, the one that made me feel sharp, controlled. When I walked into that boardroom, Paul, Mark, Dan, and Greg were already there. They looked smug, acting like this was all going to blow over. Paul had that same cocky smirk on his face, the one he always wore when he thought he was untouchable. But today, they weren't untouchable. They were cornered, and they didn't even know it yet. Ruth came in a few minutes later, cool and composed, holding a thick folder. She sat at the head of the table, placed the folder down, and said, "Let's begin." She started by thanking everyone for their hard work during the transition. That fake corporate tone. Then, she slid a stack of papers across the table toward Paul and his crew. Paul glanced at it, confused, then flipped through the pages. His face went pale. Mark leaned over, whispering frantically. Dan's hands started shaking. Greg looked like he'd been punched in the gut. It was everything, every fake invoice, every kickback, every shady offshore transfer, all neatly documented and laid out in black and white. And then Ruth pressed play on a small speaker. The recording of their secret meeting played, their own voices echoing in the boardroom, clear as day. Paul's voice, "We can move it all before they finish the audit. They'll never catch it." Dan's voice, "Just put it under the marketing budget, no one looks at that." Greg's voice, "If we delay the vendor reports, we can buy a few weeks." Their words, their plans, all laid bare. The room went dead silent. I watched Paul's face shift from shock to anger to panic. He opened his mouth to speak, but Ruth held up her hand. "Enough," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Paul, Mark, Dan, Greg, you're all terminated immediately for cause. Legal counsel has been notified. Security is waiting outside." Paul jumped up, shouting, "This is a setup. He pointed at me, wild-eyed, "She's been feeding you lies." Ruth didn't even flinch. "I have the receipts, Paul. And I have your own words. This is not a setup. This is accountability." Paul's eyes darted to me. "You little snake," he hissed. "You think you're safe? You're nothing. You were always nothing." Ruth stood, her chair scraping the floor. "Actually, she's the new vice president of operations, effective immediately. You can leave now, or we'll have security remove you." Paul looked like he was going to explode. He lunged forward, but security was already there. They grabbed him, dragged him back. Mark and Dan stumbled out after him, their faces red with shame. Greg tried to mumble some excuse, but no one listened. They were gone. Just like that. When the door closed behind them, Ruth turned to me. Her face softened just a little. "You did good," she said. "I know this wasn't easy." I nodded, still shaking inside. "Thank you," I whispered. But it wasn't over yet. 2 weeks later, I heard the news: Paul had been arrested. The SEC had launched an investigation. They found evidence of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. He was looking at years in federal prison. Mark and Dan were named in the investigation, too, and Greg's CPA license was suspended. Their reputations were shot. Their careers were dead. I didn't even have to lift a finger. The system took care of it, because I had done the work. I had waited, documented, and struck at the right time. They thought they could bury me. They didn't know I was already digging their graves. The best part? Paul's wife filed for divorce after the scandal broke. She took the house, the cars, and half of what was left of his assets. His kids refused to talk to him. He ended up living in a rundown apartment, alone, bitter, forgotten. The man who once laughed in my face, told me I was nothing, was now nothing himself. And me? I thrived. I built a team that respected me, not just as a figurehead, but as a leader. I mentored women and young professionals, making sure no one else would have to sit through what I did. I didn't just get revenge. I got justice. And when I walked into that boardroom every morning, I took my seat at the head of the table, not because I was the diversity hire, but because I earned it. Every single day. They underestimated me. They won't make that mistake again.